Hi, welcome to the Secrets of Sleep Success. My name is Vera Sticker. I'm coming from Wunder, and I'm very happy to be co-hosting with Inceptive to bring this to you today. Before we get started, just a little bit about me. I've been working in education for about 10 years in a lot of different settings, and I've also been a sleep evangelist, what I call a sleep evangelist. I love sleep a lot. I think most people don't get enough sleep, and I love to talk about it and help people get the sleep that they should be getting. And of course, I have to talk a little bit about Wunder very quickly. If you don't know us, we're a parenting platform that tries to help parents build good interaction habits with their children and sort of build on their learning. We have an iOS app out now. We're going to be launching a smart speaker with some very cool sleep features in October. And we're also trialing some parent coaching, so you can talk to experts like me about some of the issues that you're having. That's all I'm going to say for now, because I know what you want to talk about is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to do a very, very, very quick little science lesson just on the background of baby sleep. I think whatever your baby's age is, it's important to kind of have that little bit of foundational knowledge, because baby sleep can be very erratic and confusing, and I think it helps if you kind of know why that's happening. So we're going to talk about kind of the science a little bit, what sleep regressions are and why they're happening, and then we're going to go into the practical stuff. That's going to be most of what we're talking about today. Okay, how do we get on a good sleep plan? What are the basic things we need? What about sleep training? And then talking about some kind of common issues that you or people you know might be facing. And I put Q&A at the end there, but I'm going to have time for questions throughout. So if something comes up, just feel free to ask at any point when you see the question slide. All right, so like I said, very quick little science lesson, starting with, I think, something that probably most of you may know already, which is REM and non-REM sleep. If you don't remember which is which, I kind of like these little graphics. REM sleep is bubbling, moving, active. Non-REM is quiet, still, deep. And it looks very different in adults and newborns. So the top is adults. We have sleep cycles of about 90 to 100 minutes. So we go through the different stages of sleep every 90 minutes or so. We have circadian rhythms as well. So we go through these cycles at night. We're hardwired to do that. We can take naps during the day, but that's not really what our bodies are set up for as much. And we start in that non-REM, so that quieter sleep. And at first we're just kind of nodding off a little bit, and we're getting deeper, very deep. And we end in REM sleep, which is when you're dreaming, your eyes are moving, your brain is moving, your body is still. And from there, you go back to that stage one, very, very, very light non-REM sleep. And you might actually wake up at that point, even if you don't know it. It's actually very common to wake up in the middle of the night. And I'll get to why that's important in a second. But just to add that, you may transition back to stage one non-REM. You may actually wake up for a minute before going back to sleep. So this all looks very, very different in your brand new newborn baby. First of all, they have no circadian rhythm. They have just come out of the womb. Night and day is meaningless to them. They have no idea. So they are going to sleep at any time that they're feeling sleepy. Their cycles are much, much shorter. They're only about 50, 60 minutes. So they go through it much faster and have shorter sleep times as a result. And they start with their version of REM sleep, which we sometimes call active sleep, because when we're in REM, our bodies are lying still. There's actually a process that basically forces us to stay still even while our minds are awake, or awake-ish, obviously. But when newborns are in that active sleep, they are like moving, they are making sounds, they might be kind of vocalizing or even crying. So an asleep baby may really not seem like an asleep baby. They may seem very, very awake, but actually be sleeping. And that can make up half of their sleep. So half of the time they're asleep, they might be very, very active. Especially a lot of parents talk about like grunting noises. A lot of parents talk about twitching and moving around a lot. Totally normal, totally, totally normal. From there, they move into kind of this restless in-between phase, and then they go into their deep, quiet sleep that actually looks to sleep. It actually looks to us like sleep when we think of sleep. So that quiet sleep is only about half of the time. And they're going to spend the next several months and even the next few years kind of moving from this bottom line here to this top line like us. So just a couple of big takeaways from this. As I said, sleep kind of evolves in total over the first few years, but then especially over those first 4 to 6 months. A lot of babies kind of have the more grown-up sleep architecture in place by around 4 months. For some babies, it kind of takes a little longer and around 6 months. But in that period, they kind of go from completely different to more or less like an adult sleep pattern with that non-REM to REM transition. As I said, your awake baby might not be awake, even if they absolutely seem like they are. And just like adults, babies can wake up in the night and then just go back to sleep. So when we think of like sleeping through the night, what we think is like just going to bed, lying flat for 8 hours, or maybe moving like in your sleep, but basically, you know, just being asleep that whole time. But actually, it's pretty normal to wake up at some points when you're kind of moving through those sleep cycles, when you're at that REM to light stage. The thing is that we just don't remember it, or we just get ourselves back to sleep again. So we're not disturbed by that being awake. That's perfectly like reasonable as also like sleeping through the night. So if you're looking for your baby to start sleeping through the night, if you're at that point, you're not really looking for complete and total stillness for that whole time. They might wake up a bit. They might even do a little bit of fussing in their crib. The important key point, and we'll get to this a lot more when we talk about sleep training, is can they get themselves back to sleep in short order? Are they going to be able to handle this on their own? So quickly, the other part that I want to talk about, this little science lesson, is sleep regression. If you're very, very lucky and don't know what that is, it just means that your child was sleeping well, or at least well enough, and now they're really struggling with it. It usually comes on around that 4 to 6 months, usually around 4 months age. Around 8 to 10 months, it can come on, and at 18 months. And for some kids, it doesn't happen at all, and they just transition more easily. For some very unlucky parents, they hit all of these, and some people have, you know, 1 or 2, but not all of them. And I know that this doesn't sound like good news at the moment, but the good news is they're temporary, and they last about like 3 to 6 weeks usually. I know that sounds like a really long time if you're in the middle of it, but just remember that, you know, this will pass. And the funny thing is that it's actually a good thing when it happens. Doesn't feel that way, I know, but it actually is. Because when there's a sleep regression, it either means that your baby is going through a big developmental leap, and so they're, you know, they're more energetic at night, they're more restless at night because their bodies and minds are processing all the new skills that they're picking up. You know, they just kind of can't totally rest because so much is happening for them. Or they're having some kind of transition in their sleep architecture. They're transitioning from that, you know, newborn sleep to more closer to adult sleep. That's what usually happens around that 4-month period. Around 8 to 10 or maybe 18 months, they might be transitioning down in naps, and so kind of struggling with that. Also 8 to 10 months is a lot of like motor growth as well. They're like crawling and, you know, moving around a lot. So typically when you have a sleep regression, I know it's hard to look at it as a good thing, but you can at least say like, okay, my baby is growing up and things might be a little tougher for the next few weeks. Okay, so that actually sounds like a really good place to segue, because of course the inevitable question is, great, what do we do? But before that, are there any questions?
This is Ashley. So I have a 9.5-month-old, and I wouldn't say she's ever gone through sleep regression because she's just never been a good sleeper.
That also happens, yeah.
Yeah, she just sleeps for like the most is maybe 5 hours at a time. And then she's maybe slept through the night like 10 times ever, like not even woken up for, a diaper change or anything. So what my question is like, is there anything that we can do to help her settle in more? I don't believe in cry it out. We try and feed her a lot before we go down so that she has a nice full belly. Of course, that's up to her, so we can't force feed her. But we do our best and, comfort her in the middle of the night. And then sometimes, like also lately, at around when she reached around 8 months, she just wakes up sometimes like completely screaming, and it sounds like a pain cry, and we're wondering, is this normal? Is this something that other parents go through? Is it could it be that she's just realizing that she's alone and she's scared? Could it be nightmares? Because to me it sounds like a scared cry. So I don't know if that's kind of a couple questions in one.
No, I'm glad for all the context. This is all stuff I have heard from many other parents with babies your age. So rest assured, these are, common problems. And there are things that you can absolutely do to help. If you don't mind, I'm going to continue a little bit because I think some of what I'm about to talk about will maybe help. And then if not, just check back in and tell me that something is still missing for you.
Sure, thanks.
Cool, okay. So one thing that I want to make sure of is, okay, so we're talking practical sleep solutions now. So actually your question is really a perfect segue. And the first thing is we want to make sure that you kind of have the foundational requirements for good sleep. Like these 4 things are where it's at for good sleep. And if any of them are missing, adding them can make a huge difference. Now, your baby at 9.5 months is a little bit old to be having the night and day problem. This is more appropriate to newborns who very frequently, because they don't have that circadian rhythm down, will mistake day for night, and they'll end up sleeping all day and staying awake all night, or just really being confused and not knowing when to sleep at all. So I recommend, and this is true for older babies as well, but especially in the early months, just making sure that daytime is full of light and noise and stimulation and excitement, and night is quiet, dark, boring. There's nothing stimulating or interesting happening at night. It is just dull. So this may also be relevant to the older babies as well. If like when they get up, there's a lot of interaction and excitement, that can be really reinforcing. When older babies get up, say to feed, if they need a diaper change, what I recommend is just still keeping the lights low, talking in nice, quiet voice, keeping it very neutral, not making too much eye contact, and just getting them back as soon as possible. So it's very minimal interaction and stimulation. The space is very important. I couldn't resist calling it the good space. But you want to make sure the room is dark, it's not too hot or too cold. If you don't have white noise, I am an absolute fanatic about white noise. I use white noise. I know adults who use it as well as children. And you can try lots of different things. For some kids, the traditional kind of staticky white noise works wonders. Some kids, prefer like a rainfall-y sound or a river sound. I think, starting with the default and trying different things helps. White noise is great because if you're trying to keep the house super, super silent to follow that dark, quiet, boring thing, what happens is if there's like a pin that drops outside the door and the baby is in that lighter stage, they might wake up and because it's too quiet all around them. So silence can be unhelpful. White noise really keeps them, quiet, not hearing outside noises, but not being exposed to stimulating noise either. And it also reminds them of the sound of the womb, especially if you start it right from the start and keep going with it. So I love, love, love white noise. You have the happy belly down, it sounds like. A full belly is a sleepy baby. I really like something called Dream Feed. This, again, applies a little bit more to younger babies, but if you have a baby who wakes up very often to feed, or like wakes you up like 2 hours after you've gone to bed to feed, one thing that you can try is feeding right before you go to bed, even if they're asleep. And you don't wake them up, you just kind of gently take them, gently feed them. So they're still kind of like in and out of it a little bit, and then put them back down. A lot of the time that can extend their sleep. So they're not getting you up like an hour later. Either they're sleeping much longer, or they're at least giving you a chance to sleep, as they're, until their next feeding. I do not recommend feeding to sleep. If that applies to anyone here or anyone who's listening, it is what we call a sleep prop. If they feed to sleep at one point in the night, they probably need to feed to sleep, or think they need to feed to sleep at every point in the night, every day. And the obvious problem there is that sometimes you want them to sleep without that, and it can be very, very disruptive to sleep if they think they need a feeding every time they want to fall asleep. And the last piece is the bedtime routine magic. If you don't have a solid, consistent bedtime routine that is happening every night, that is like a huge change that can be made, that will improve every single night. It doesn't have to be long. I'm going to go into one in a second that I love, just like a great starter routine. So this may be a little on the long side for some people. It's flexible, it's adaptable. You don't have to do exactly this, obviously, but it's just kind of a good place to start. You can do a nice warm bath. I like this because it's like an actual physical transition. You're saying, let's wash off the day. We're getting ready to go to sleep now. Especially if it's nice and warm, relaxing. You can put like lavender scented products in the water. I'm not a huge like essential oil aromatherapy guru, but lavender straight up works. It just does. I use lavender products for myself. It's just a fantastic, calming, soothing scent. When they get out of the bath, big hug with the towel, and you can do some infant massage. Is a wonderful way to bond. It's very calming for both of you, really. It's very relaxing. And you can take advantage of that time to really have some bonding with your baby. So you can look into their eyes as you're giving them, a little rub on their arms, their legs, their tummies, their backs. Can't look in their eyes when they're on their, when you're rubbing their back, but obviously the rest of it. And you can like even do a little like singing, a little crooning, tell them a story. It's just a really nice time for the two of you to connect. And here you can also make liberal use of lavender scent, again, just to get them even more wound down, to get their bodies ready for sleep mode. And as we were saying, the happy belly, the full belly, so you top them up for that last feed, but you want to intervene before they're actually down, right? You don't want to do the feeding to sleep. So you want to make sure that you're getting them to bed after they've fed. So you can pick a very calm, soothing book. We're talking about like Goodnight Moon, not Touch, Think, Play, or like lots of lifts and slaps, or like bright colors. And this is not about like getting through a book. If you get through one page and they're nodding completely, that's fine. This is just about getting one last little bonding moment in. It's about reading, of course, because I am a huge fan of reading from birth. This is a nice time to get it in. It's about having, this little tiny buffer between feeding and sleep, so you don't have that prop happening. If you can get through a whole book, that's fine. If you get 2 pages in and they're done, also fine. So this is my like classic starter routine. If you don't have a routine, this is just a great thing to try, and then kind of, change as needed. Some people want to do baths at a different time. That's fine. Some people like to include some very quiet, low key playing or a song. Again, as long as it's like not stimulating, as long as it's basically a little bit boring, a little bit chill, as long as there's lots of opportunity to just be having like this nice kind of calm vibe, ready for sleep, low light, all of that. whatever works for you. Okay. All right, pausing again for questions, and I see we have one in the chat. Okay, how can you train the baby to fall asleep without the feeding? So you're following those steps that have 3 and 4 flips. Okay, perfect timing, because the next thing I'm going to talk about is the sleep training. And if you are brand new to, if you're just starting out with trying to flip those 2 around, so you're doing the book and then you're doing the feeding to sleep, you know, you don't have to immediately change everything over if you're not into that. Let's talk about some versions of sleep training. What is it? Not as scary as it sounds, I promise. I think people tend to hear sleep training and just default assume that it means like leaving your baby to cry alone in their room for hours. Some parents actually do that. It works for some of them. I'm not going to say it doesn't. It's far from the only method. There are many, much gentler methods of sleep training. Some call themselves no cry. I don't know if there's really a foolproof no cry solution, but there are many that involve very few tears. You know, there's a very low tears end of the spectrum, all the way through to that, like, you know, shoving the door and walking away. So I have 6 here. These are kind of 6 of the most common ones, the most popular. And I tried to arrange them kind of from least crying to most crying. So over here on the top left is the so-called no cry, or you can also kind of call it easing, fading, very gradual version. And then all the way in the bottom right is full extinction, which is what people are thinking of when they think of like cry it out. It's where you literally do put the baby, you go through the routine, put the baby down, you leave. And I will say all 6 of these have a few things in common. One is they all encourage the things that I already talked about. They all encourage the, you know, setting up the space, the dark room, the white noise. They all encourage having that day-night association, so getting lots of activity in during the day, keeping it quiet and dull at night, having the full belly, and having the routine. Every single one of these talks about the routine. It is critical. So if you don't have the routine, start there. And I know you mentioned that you do. So now we're going to talk a little about what different people say you can do to get them going to sleep without the feeding, without the sleep prop. That's really the goal for all of these. They all share that in common. The goal is to get them to a point where they don't rely on, you know, you nursing, whatever they're like too attached to, whatever they're stuck with as they're trying to go to sleep, whatever they can't sleep without. We're trying to get them away from that and able to soothe themselves and get themselves back to sleep. I think they all also pretty much agree. The one other thing is that there is a trade-off here. The cry it out methods do work for some people, not for everyone. One thing that they do have is they tend to be fast. If they do work, you know it pretty quickly. The no cry type methods, the fading methods, are much gentler. They do take more time. Some of them can take several weeks, and they require a little more, ironically, I think a little more discipline, because the cry it out is very difficult. I don't want to say it's not. It requires a great deal of self-discipline for a few nights. The fading methods require more discipline in just keeping it consistent and doing it the same way every time. It can just be hard to do that like day after day for several weeks and kind of keeping track of what you're doing. It can get a little wearing over time. But that said, I'm not saying any one of these is better than any others. Whatever works best is the best one for you and your family. So on the no cry end, kind of the lowest tiers method, what they recommend is basically picking one sleep prop at a time and fading each one out very, very, very gradually. So if you're nursing to sleep now, maybe you will spend a little less time nursing so that they're a little drowsy, but not all the way asleep. I know one of the no cry methods basically says, like, try that. If they start crying once they're done feeding, you know, start feeding again. Basically, like, try to make them comfortable while sort of teaching them, like, okay, but we want you to not be doing this anymore. That is probably the slowest method. Others say, like, cut down on the time you're feeding bit by bit, or cut down on the amount you're feeding if you're doing it with a bottle. But again, very gradually, one thing at a time. So you're just very gently easing away. Bedtime and routine fading are also on the gentle side. Routine fading is basically treating the props as the routine. So you have your, like, good bedtime routine, but you're also treating, say, the feeding as a routine. And again, you're just going to fade it out. This version is a little more structured and a little more planned. So you're going to really have, like, okay, I'm going to do this many minutes tonight, this many minutes tomorrow, or I'm going to do it this way tonight and this way tomorrow. So you're just kind of doing a little more, like, directed, structured planning in advance. Bedtime fading is most appropriate usually for older kids. So since we do have some older babies who are going to become toddlers in the near future, or if you're listening and you have a toddler, bedtime fading tends to work a little better for them. These are for those babies where, like, you put them down at 7 and they're just not having it, and they're just not having it, and they're just not having it for hours, and then they finally fall asleep at, like, 10, and you're like, oh my God, that was 3 hours of nightmare. So the theory behind bedtime fading is, well, maybe 10 o'clock is their natural falling asleep time, actually. So if that is the case, what you do is basically arrange the day so that you can put them down at that natural sleep time at 10 or 9 or whatever it is. And if that works, if they're happily falling asleep just at a very late hour, then you're just going to fade up the bedtime until they're sleeping at the time that's right for you. So it's kind of a specific audience for that one, but it's in this same kind of general idea of, like, gentle, slow, gradual, easing, fading method. Pick up, put down is kind of where we get, like, halfway, because it's a little bit closer to the cry it out type method in that you are going to, like, put your child in the crib and you're going to move away, but you can still offer a lot of physical comfort, and you can still go and do whatever you need to do. Well, I shouldn't say that. You can still do a lot of things to comfort them, get them, you know, soothed and ready to go back to sleep. So you're still very involved in it. You don't feed with that one. So you do stop the sleep prop the first night. That's what brings it sort of closer to that end of the spectrum. You're going to go pretty much cold turkey on it. So you put them in the crib, walk away. If crying starts, you go back in, you pick up, soothe, 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 put back down when they're calm, walk out again. And you do that as many times as it takes to soothe them and help them calm down. So if they keep crying, wait a minute, go back in, pick up, pat, 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 words, kind of whatever you need in that, you know, as you're sitting by the crib, you know, holding them until they're calm and back down again. And the theory is that over time, over a few weeks, they'll need less of that physical support and comfort, and you can fade that out so that they're helping themselves go to sleep. The chair method is a very middle ground, very much a middle ground. Literally, you put yourself in a chair next to the bedside. Again, you go cold turkey with this one, no feeding. You do your bedtime routine with the book or whatever little buffer you have in there. And I should say, for all of these, the goal is for something we call drowsy but awake, which means they're getting tired. They may not even look super tired, but they're calm. They're not, like, alert and stimulated. They're, just calm and ready, not sleeping. Or they might be tired, yawning and rubbing their eyes, but not sleeping. So what the chair method is, you put them in the crib or whatever you're using for sleep, and you sit down in a chair next to the crib or the pack and play or whatever it is. And over time, so the first night you're there, if they're crying, you're physically next to them. You can kind of give them a pat. You can give them some, soothing, comforting words. You can touch. They do recommend against picking up at that point, but you're still next to them. You're still with them. And then over time, you're going to fade out a little bit. You're going to literally physically fade yourself. You're going to move the chair further and further away. So your baby knows you're in the room. You're physically there with them. They're not going to wake up and be alone, but you're not going to be right there to pick them up and hold them. You also sometimes see this called the shuffle camping out. It's a pretty popular method. A lot of people use it. One other thing I should say that I should have said at the beginning is the other thing that most of these have in common, I would say, at least from pick up, put down on through, is, as I said at the beginning, right? Babies can be awake or babies can be asleep rather while still seeming awake. And babies can wake up and go back to sleep. So if you hear the baby wake up and maybe cry a little bit, everything from pick up, put down through extinction kind of recommends waiting a little bit. For pick up, put down, and the chair method, a minute. Wait a minute or two. Make sure that they're not just going to stop crying on their own and go in. If they're waking up and it's a full-on scream and they're screaming for that minute, go in, do what you need to do. But if it's just a little cry or some fussing, don't rush in to take care of it for them. Let them maybe see if they can figure it out on their own before going in. The Ferber method is where that gets really methodical. So Ferber recommends actually doing timed intervals. You go in, you do the routine, put the baby down. If you hear the crying, you wait 3 minutes. You can change it as you need. 3 minutes is a typical starter interval. You wait 3 minutes, you go in, you comfort, you give a little pat, a little rub, give them some soothing words, something comforting, some shushing, help them calm down if you can. Leave again. If the crying starts or it's still happening, you wait a little longer, maybe 5 minutes, go back in. And the third time you wait maybe 10 minutes. There's also a variation of this I actually like a little better, where instead of changing the timings through the night, you change them each night. So the first night, every interval is 3 minutes. The second night, every interval is 5 minutes, or whatever. Especially for kids who really have extreme sleep problems, or kids with developmental delays, kids who have other things going on, you can make those intervals shorter. There are some kids who really need you to come back in much, much sooner. A lot of kids can tolerate 3 minutes, even if it doesn't seem like they can, but some kids will really need the extra support. That's okay. All of these are however it works for you is what's most important. And as I said, full extinction is full extinction is a little bit you can't really vary it that much. It's put them in and go. It's not necessarily my favorite method, but again, it does work for some parents. It really does. And when it does, it's very quick. So I'm not trying to shade anyone for whom this has worked or if you need to do it. And there are articles out there that say it's going to be damaging. The research does not show that that's the case. Research shows that there are no long-term ill effects from doing it. It's not my favorite to recommend. I usually recommend something in the middle just because it's fairly unpleasant. It's very hard to listen to a lot of crying and not do anything about it after any time. It can be arguably even harder on the parents than it is on the child. But there are no long-term ill effects from it. If it works for you, please do it. If it works for you, that is what's best for you to do. That's true for all of these. My favorite is your favorite. So I'm hoping that maybe gave you some ideas. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Okay, I'm gonna pause here for questions, and I'm hoping that this gave you some ideas for some things you can do. I think both of you, I'm hoping can benefit from some of this. But if not, I think let's pause here for follow-up questions. I'm gonna take a drink, excuse me. No?
Vera, I have a question not related to really sleep training methods, but I keep hearing from parents that they really love snoo and it helps their baby sleep. Do you have any experience with that or any comments?
I don't specifically have experience with the snoo, but that tends to be for younger babies. We really haven't talked about newborns other than the science of it at all. But one thing that's very good for newborns is swaddling. So having this experience of being wrapped up tightly. I gather the snoo helps with that experience. It actually, from what I know of it, does a lot of what Harvey Karp recommends for soothing younger babies. Some of these methods can also work for older babies, so I'm happy to go into them. He calls them the 5 S's for soothing a baby, and I think the snoo does some of these. It swaddles them, so it holds them nice and tight. I can't remember the S, or swing, I think is the S. It moves them a little bit, so doing a little jiggling can help. It shushes them, so it's that coming back to that white noise factor, that sound is very soothing. This one, it doesn't quite apply to the snoo because obviously you have to still put them in on their back for sleeping. But one thing that Dr. Karp recommends to soothe children is to hold them on their side or stomach before putting them down. Sometimes that can help them settle. Swing, swaddle, shush, side stomach. I know the last one that I like to talk about is scent, because again, that either the lavender scent or actually something that smells like you can be extremely soothing. But again, that's not in the snoo. I'm afraid that sadly I'm blanking on the last S of Harvey Karp. But yeah, so the short version being, I totally get why the snoo works, especially for younger babies. Basically, it kind of incorporates a lot of these very soothing things that can help your baby, sleep at night. Again, especially when they're very young. You can also do all of these things yourself, sort of the manual version.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about this or anything else that we've talked about?
So there's a question from Anne in the chat.
All right. For some reason I'm having trouble pulling up the chat. Would you mind reading it?
Yeah, so she's saying that when she puts her baby down in the crib, the baby wakes up more and she makes a face almost out of fear, or it seems like she is thinking about what you are doing. So do you have any advice?
So, Anne, can you clarify a little bit what you mean by that?
So I think she's trying to say that her baby becomes more active when she puts her down.
Goes into the crib.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got chat. So when I put my baby down in the crib, she seems to wake up more and makes a face of fear, or seems to be. I would guess that it's a little more like, oh, what are you doing? Like, maybe she's startling a little bit. Maybe she's like, wait, what's this? Yeah, it feels, yeah. Also very common. One thing that might help is making it a more gradual process, but it is pretty common for babies to sort of have that little jolt. Again, the ultimate goal is to get them to kind of get over it and get back to, get calm and into sleep on their own. But one thing you can do to kind of help a little more is basically like you're holding her and you're kind of like lean into the crib so that you're still holding her most of the way down. You get her legs down, let her body gently down. And if she's still kind of startling, you can put a hand like very gently on her tummy, on her chest, just to kind of say like, okay, like I'm still here. I'm here, it's cool, it's okay. And hopefully that maybe helps her be a little less startled by it. It's a little less abrupt than just like suddenly she's by herself. I hope that helps. Okay, no problem. Let's jump to kind of the last part. So I just put up some kind of common sleep problems that a lot of babies tend to have. And I figured we could go over maybe, what time is it? Maybe it's time for like 1 or 2. So if anyone has any requests, again, especially given that we're a smaller group, I'm happy to, I have the chat up now. So if anyone has one of these in particular that they're interested in, I'm happy to just dive into it. We have sleeps all day, stays up all night, fights naps. I see your request for fights naps. Naps are tricky. There can be a few reasons that a baby fights naps. The one I like to start with, though, is nap timing can be very difficult. Babies very frequently seem tired long after they are actually tired. There's this concept of overtiredness, right? And often what looks like tired cues is actually overtired cues. If your baby is like yawning really big, if they're pulling on their ears or on their hair, if they're getting really fussy and cranky, especially if they're starting to actually cry, they're overtired at that point. And the super frustrating thing about overtiredness is that they will fight sleep at that point. They actually have sort of it gives them that second wind and gives them more energy. And suddenly they're like, oh my God, I'm awake and I don't want to be, but I don't know how to go to sleep. So I'm just going to be mad about it. So I find that tends to be behind a lot of nap fighting, is that we've missed the tired window and gone straight into overtired, and now they don't want to do it. What I like for that is something called awake windows. Sometimes you see awake windows, wake windows. Sometimes you see sleep windows or sleep times, awake times. It's all kind of variations on the same theme, which is babies at a certain age tend to need a certain amount of time awake before they go to sleep. And I think a lot of parents tend to overestimate how much that time is. So you can look up, there's a lot of really good resources online about wake windows and how long a wake window should be at a certain age. And this isn't like a by the book to the letter thing. If an app or a resource says like your baby's wake window is exactly 3 hours, but you wake them up after a nap and they're clearly still awake 3 hours later, okay, adjust. It's a good place to start to like download one of these resources and say like, okay, how often should I really be putting them down for a nap, or at what, around what time? And doing that, at least if you start there, you can start to pick up on what the actual tired cues are before they get to overtired, because they can be very subtle for a lot of babies. I mentioned this very briefly in passing before, but for some babies, drowsy and tired just looks like being calm. Sometimes if they're just kind of sitting there like, I'm not looking at you, I'm not looking at anything, but I'm just calm, that can actually mean tired. Because an awake, alert baby, even if they're not really doing anything, will want to make eye contact, will be looking around. If they're not really wanting to make eye contact, if they're kind of just staring off, they're probably tired at that point, even if you don't see any yawning. There are a few others like that. This is kind of a weird one, but a lot of parents report that like their eyebrows or their eyes might start to get like pink or red. For some kids, that's actually getting into overtired, but that could be one as well. So that's where I usually recommend starting with nap fighting, is just check into your scheduling and your timing and see if maybe you're starting the nap too late. If something is happening there that makes them, feel like they need to fight sleep, even if they're actually tired for it. Yeah, that's where I'd start. If that's really not working, if you have the wake windows down and they're still fighting the nap, I would look into the nap routine or the nap setup. Actually, I guess I would do either. I guess I would do both of those things. Make sure that you still have like a good setup for naps. Make sure you have like a good wind down routine. But I think if you're trying to put them down and like they're really fighting, I think most of the time I hear this from parents who have that stuff down but are missing the timing. So I think the timing is more likely. Okay, I think we have time for one more, maybe. Yeah. We have fights bedtime, wakes up crying in the night, won't go to sleep without something. With a lot of newborn parents, I see won't go to sleep if they're not like attached to me. Very, very common with newborns. Obviously, with older children, the more problematic one, once they get past that 4-month regression, is won't go to sleep without feeding, nursing, being in my arms. Wakes up too early in the morning can be very common for toddlers. It's not usually, it can happen for babies. It tends to be more common once you get to toddlers. So we have these options, or I think we have time for, what do you think, for like 1 or 2 more questions potentially?
Yeah, let's check. And Ashley, do you have any questions? And while we're waiting for questions, I just wanted to get your thoughts on, time changes, the daylight savings, and, obviously we're not anywhere close to it yet.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there,
Yeah.
but not in the next month or so, though. So, but do you have any advice?
I hate the change. I think everyone hates the change. It's actually like proven to be bad for everyone. I can't remember, it's something like daylight savings time is actually the good one. Like everyone says abolish daylight savings time. Whichever it is, I just wish we didn't change it all. I used to live in Japan. I lived there for 3 years, and there was no daylight savings time, or there was always daylight savings time. And either way, it was great, and I wish we would go back to it. All I can recommend for dealing with the change is just to be as consistent as possible around it. Obviously, there's going to be one night where you're going to either have to put them down earlier, or I recommend putting them down earlier rather than getting less sleep. And you may have to deal with a little bit of a fight from that. It's not going to be a pleasant night, but just be super consistent before and after, and they'll get back on track pretty quickly. I see one more question. I've never seen my baby fall asleep aside from when she breastfeeds or is in the car sometimes. Is this normal? Yeah, but it does sound like those are then the sleep props that she's reliant on. So the car is a very common one too, that, the movement and the kind of humming noise is like a pretty good, like soporific thing to make them fall asleep. But it sounds like there's a pretty strong feeding to sleep prop happening there. So I will say also about sleep training stuff, if it works for you, that's fine. I think there's like this expectation that like everyone has to sleep train. If what you're doing is not an issue for you in your household, don't change it. That's fine. But if you want this to, if you want to not be nursing at night anymore, or you want them to sleep on their own, then it sounds like it's probably time to break that break that association and start weaning away from it. So you can look, we're going to be sending out these slides and the recording. So you can look back into any of those sleep training methods or, check any of those out, or check out some of the other suggestions for ways to kind of find other ways to get her to sleep. All right. So I'm just going to, okay. Oh, that was that screen.
Great.
All right. So thank you so much for those who are here or those who are listening. I cannot go without mentioning that Wunder has some very cool sleep features that can help you out with stuff like this. Our app has sleep and nap tracking, so you can work on that scheduling and that timing. The smart speaker lets you do it hands-free. We also have cry detection, 30 varieties of white noise, and a nightlight. And you get access to personal support when you're a Wunder user. We're trying out kind of different methods of our coaching right now, where you can talk to me and get sleep advice. And because you have come or are listening, you can also email me anytime with other questions. I am happy to answer if something, a question wasn't answered, or if you've tried one of these suggestions and it hasn't worked. please email me. I love talking about sleep. I really do. It's, I think, something that is overlooked too much of the time.